a kitchen that felt like a courtroom. A glass of water I was holding slipped from my grasp, exploding on the tile floor like a gunshot. My father's voice didn't just fill the room, it poisoned it. "What in God's name have you done, Clara?" I didn't flinch. I didn't run. I just stood there, my spine straight as an iron rod, one hand resting on the gentle, undeniable curve beneath my shirt. "I'm going to have a baby," I said, my voice steady, a flat lake on a windless day. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. My mother, Helen, stopped dead halfway down the stairs. The color drained from her face so completely she looked like a ghost. Her fingers, still damp from dishwater, began to shake. "Clara, you're 18, she whispered, as if my age was the crime itself. My father, Robert, took a step closer. The muscle in his jaw pulsed like a trapped animal. "Who is it?" he demanded, each word a chip of ice. "Some deadbeat from the town? Some boy with nothing to his name but the shirt on his back?" "His name isn't important," I replied, holding my ground. "What matters is that this is my child, and I am keeping it." He let out a sound, a harsh, ugly scoff that had no humor in it. "You've just set a match to your entire future, Clara. We gave you a path, a good home, a college education, a legacy, and you've set fire to it all for a momentary mistake." My heart felt like it was cracking, but I didn't let it show. "It's not a mistake, and you're not angry about the baby. You're furious that you can't command my life anymore." That was the final straw. "Get out," he roared, the sound vibrating in my bones. "Pack your bags and get out of my house. You want to be a grown-up? Then go live like one." I turned to my mother. For a single fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something, maybe love, maybe pity, in her eyes. But it died before it could take hold. She just shook her head, her voice a broken whisper. "How could you do this to us? You've shamed this family." And that was it. They never asked who the father really was. They never asked if I had a place to go. They never asked if I was terrified. They just showed me the door. What they didn't know was that I had already signed the lease on a tiny studio apartment on the other side of the city. They didn't know about the job I had already secured. And they certainly could never have guessed that the man I'd fallen for wasn't some aimless boy, but someone whose life would one day make their heads spin. I walked out with nothing but a single suitcase and a furnace burning in my soul. I didn't shed a tear. I didn't scream. I smiled a small secret smile because I knew something they didn't. And 15 years later, as they stood gawking at the grandson they'd never met, they would finally understand the monumental cost of discarding me. Their faces would lose all color when they witnessed the woman I had forged myself into. That first night in my new apartment was the coldest I have ever known. The heating wasn't connected. The only furniture was a worn mattress on the bare floorboards, and a fractured pane in the window whistled a lonely tune with every gust of wind. I sat in that emptiness, eating cold beans from a can, my phone dark and silent beside me. No calls from old friends, not a single message from my mother. I wasn't even surprised. I had been branded the family's great disappointment, the daughter who threw her future away. But I wasn't defeated. Not yet. Because I had him, my baby. And I had my job. A month before my world imploded, I had quietly taken a position as a front desk assistant at a small private dental practice. The salary was minimal, but the dentist who hired me, Dr. Evans, saw something in me. He didn't care that I was young and pregnant. He just said, "Show me you're reliable and you'll always have work here." So I arrived every morning before the sun was up and stayed long after the last patient left. As my belly swelled, so did my determination. No handouts, no sympathy. At night, by the light of my laptop, I devoured every free online course I could find. Bookkeeping, business management, anything that felt like a brick I could use to build a foundation. I wasn't just planning to get by. I was planning to become a person they wouldn't even recognize. I stopped looking at my old social media feeds. Seeing my cousin Jessica's photos from university, with my mother commenting proud messages on every single one, was a special kind of agony. I blocked it all out. When I was 7 months along, I was working the reception desk by day and doing remote data entry for a logistics company by night. One evening, my body gave out. I collapsed on a bench at the bus stop. I was exhausted, hungry, and utterly alone, a 20-year-old girl carrying the weight of 2 lives. Dr. Evans found me there, shivering, silent tears cutting paths through the grime on my cheeks, arms wrapped protectively around my stomach. He sent the nurse away, cleared his afternoon appointments, and sat with me. "Are you going to be okay, Clara?" "No," I whispered, the truth finally escaping. "But I will be." He didn't press details. He just nodded, understanding. Then he handed me an envelope. "Give this to my brother," he said. "He manages the regional branch for Crestline Medical Group. He's looking for someone with grit." I stared at the envelope, then back at him. "Why are you doing this for me?" He offered a gentle smile. "Because I remind you of a young woman I once turned my back on. I've promised myself never to make that error again." That single act of faith altered the course of my life. 2 months later, I held my son, Leo, in my arms for the first time. I cried then, great heaving sobs that shook my entire body, not from fear and not from loneliness, but from a love so profound and fierce that it made every second of the struggle feel worthwhile. In that moment, I made a sacred vow to this perfect boy with his wise eyes and tiny grasping hands. He would never, for one instant, feel the sting of being unwanted, not like I had. What followed were years of relentless sacrifice, hunger, fatigue, endless nights, and a single-minded focus on a plan. If they thought I would fade into obscurity, they had severely underestimated the girl they had cast out. I had no blueprint, just a newborn son, a part-time income, and a resolve they never knew I possessed. Leo was just 10 weeks old when I started working nights again, this time from home, inputting data and managing appointment schedules for Crestline Medical. Dr. Evans's brother, Michael, took a chance on me. He didn't offer me a title I hadn't earned or a salary I didn't deserve. His only advice was, meet your deadlines, own your mistakes, and never expect a rescue party. I took those words to heart. I nursed Leo between reports filed at midnight, took on freelance transcription work on weekends, and taught myself the intricacies of financial planning, spreadsheet analysis, and corporate law. I even began to change my wardrobe for the rare office visit, sharp, tailored blazers I discovered in secondhand shops, elegant flats, and an air of quiet, unshakable competence. People gradually stopped seeing a teenage mom and started seeing a professional on the rise. By the time Leo celebrated his second birthday, we had moved into a modest townhouse near the city limits. It wasn't lavish, but it was ours. A clean, safe space with a real kitchen, a patch of grass out back, and a door that no one could ever tell me to leave. I framed a picture from Leo's first birthday party and placed it on the mantelpiece. It was my beacon, my reason for pushing through every exhausting day. Meanwhile, from my parents, nothing. A void of silence. No phone calls, no letters, no attempts to see if I was even alive. But through the grapevine, through occasional emails from a well-meaning aunt, I learned that their lives had continued seamlessly, as if I had been surgically removed. My younger brother got a prestigious internship. My father received a community service award. Every family photo from holidays looked pristine and perfect. My name was never mentioned. I was a forgotten memory, a sealed-off room in the house of their lives, until the day the door to that room swung open on its own. I was 27, sitting in a strategy meeting with Michael and 2 senior partners from Crestline, when he slid a document across the polished table. "We're establishing a new operational wing," he announced, "and you've been the engine in the background for long enough, Clara. It's time you stepped into the light and led it." I was speechless. "Lead it? How?" He grinned. "Consider this your promotion, Director of Corporate Operations. Your starting salary will be $145,000 a year. Full benefits package. You'll be managing a team of 15. And yes," he added, seeing the question in my eyes, "Leo is more than welcome at the company's on-site child care center." I pressed my hand to my mouth, staring down at the contract. I couldn't form a single word. "You've worked for this, Clara," he said, his voice firm but kind. Don't you dare think of declining. This company needs a leader like you, and so does your son."
The moment I left that boardroom, I called Leo's school, told them I was coming for him early, and drove straight there. He was 9 years old by then, a head of unruly chestnut curls, intelligent hazel eyes, and a grin that it kept me going through the darkest of nights. "Where are we going, Mom?" he asked, clicking his seatbelt into place. "We're going home," I told him, my own smile wide and genuine. Our new home. That very evening, I signed the papers for a house in the most sought-after neighborhood in the city. 4 bedrooms, vaulted ceilings, and a landscape garden. I paid the first year's rent in full, up front. But my journey wasn't complete because there was one chapter I had kept entirely to myself. I had guarded the secret of Leo's father from everyone, even from Leo. Not because he was a bad person, but because he had entrusted me with his privacy. You see, the man I had connected with all those years ago wasn't a fleeting romance. He was a surgical intern from a top-tier hospital, completing a fellowship at the practice where I worked. Our time together was brief, but real. His family, however, did not approve of me, a poor, young, solitary girl. He relocated to Chicago shortly after, and when I told him I was pregnant, he did something I will always remember. He offered financial support. I thanked him, but refused, and I never contacted him again because I didn't want my son to be a line item in a budget. I wanted him to be wholly, completely mine. Now, 15 winters had passed since my parents exiled me, and then, last spring, a letter was delivered to my office. I recognized my mother's handwriting instantly, frail and unsteady on the envelope. "Clara, your aunt mentioned she saw you. We had no idea you were so close. We would very much like to see you and to meet your son. Please, if you're willing, get in touch." I sat at my desk for over an hour, just holding that piece of paper. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt a strange, cold stillness, not because they were reaching out, but because they were utterly unaware of the world they were about to step into. When I invited them to my home the following Sunday, I gave them no hints. I didn't mention my career. I said nothing about the house, or Leo's bright and kind nature, or the empire I had constructed with the same hands they said were only fit for failure. I wanted them to see it, to walk across the threshold they once slammed shut and watch the blood drain from their faces in a wave of pure, unadulterated regret. I heard their car crunch up the gravel driveway a full 15 minutes early. Of course they were early. My father, Robert, was a man who needed to control every narrative, to always be the one arriving, never the one being received. And now, a decade and a half later, he was standing on my porch with my mother at his side, both dressed as if for a formal luncheon, not a visit to the daughter they had erased. I watched them through the large bay window. My mother was clutching her handbag like a lifeline, her eyes darting over the manicured hedges, the stone fountain, and the gleaming oak door. Her lips were moving, forming silent words, perhaps an apology, perhaps a plea. I opened the door before their fingers could touch the bell. My father went rigid. My mother's mouth fell slightly ajar. The change in me was a physical shock to them. I was no longer the frightened girl in a sweatshirt hauling a suitcase across a damp lawn. I stood with a new height, a sharpness, a confidence that was innate, not borrowed. My emerald green silk top, tailored black trousers, and the simple diamond studs in my ears communicated everything my voice did not need to. "Clara." My mother breathed my name like a prayer.
"Please come in," I said, stepping back to grant them entry. They hesitated, uncertain. The house was serene, warm, and tastefully opulent. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the rich hardwood floors and the gallery of framed memories that lined the hallway. The air carried the subtle scent of freshly brewed espresso and hyacinths. "Lovely home," my father managed to say. But it wasn't a compliment. It was pure, bewildered disbelief. How? How is this possible without us? I didn't offer an explanation. He didn't directly ask. Leo is upstairs. He'll be down shortly. They stood awkwardly in the center of my living room, their eyes scanning the space like tourists in a palace, afraid to touch anything. I wasn't certain you'd write back, I began. My mother looked at me. She blinked, and then she said the words. We were mistaken. I let the silence hang. We thought we were teaching you a lesson, she continued, her voice thin. We believed if we were strict, you would come to your senses. We never imagined you would actually go. That was the entire point, I stated, my tone level. There was no bitterness, only the quiet weight of fact. My father shifted his weight, crossing his arms over his chest. You were a child yourself. You had no safety net. I had my son, and my job, and my own 2 feet. He looked away, his gaze falling on a bookshelf. The silence between us was a thick tapestry woven from 15 years of unspoken words. And then the sound of footsteps on the staircase. Leo appeared, dressed in a crisp white button-down and dark trousers, his hair neatly styled, his expression composed and inquisitive. He was tall for his age, with a calm strength in his posture. He looked like someone who had never known a day without absolute love and security. Leo, I said, this is your grandmother, Helen, and your grandfather, Robert. He looked at them for a moment, then descended the final steps and came to stand beside me, a quiet pillar of support. It's nice to meet you, he said, his voice clear and polite. My mother's hand flew to her chest. My father took an involuntary step forward, his breath catching. But what truly shattered them wasn't just his physical resemblance to me. It was the framed photographs he was holding, which he had retrieved from the display cabinet. He handed one to my mother. It was a picture of Leo standing next to a man in surgical scrubs. That's my father, he said with a quiet pride. He's a leading neurosurgeon in Chicago. He calls me every week, and we're building a telescope together for my science project. My mother's hands trembled so violently, she nearly dropped the silver frame. Then, before they could process this, Leo selected another photograph and presented it. It was a professional shot of me at the head of a long conference table, the Crestline Medical Group logo prominent on the wall behind me, surrounded by senior executives. My mom runs the whole division, Leah stated, a small, proud smile touching his lips. She's the one everyone listens to. That was the moment it happened. My father's face collapsed. It was a visible, almost audible unraveling, as if the very scaffolding of his identity had been kicked out from under him. He staggered back, his hand shooting out to grip the arm of a leather chair for support. He stammered, his voice a ragged whisper. You built all of this? I met his stunned gaze, my own composure a fortress. But beneath it lay every hungry night, every scornful word, every birthday I spent alone, every moment they were certain I would fail. No, I said, my voice calm and final. I built myself. The rest is just the evidence. The room became a tomb of silence. You could hear the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. My father remained standing, held up only by his waning pride and the chair he leaned on. My mother, still clutching the image of Leo and his father, slowly sank onto the very edge of the sofa cushion. Her mouth worked, but no sound emerged. Leo stood serenely beside me, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He didn't look confused or anxious. He looked like he understood, with a wisdom beyond his years, that the two people standing before him had chosen to be absent from his story. And now they were standing in a home they didn't help create, looking at a grandson they didn't know,
and a woman they had tried to delete from existence. My father finally found his voice, though it was strained and weak. I didn't realize you were in touch with the boy's father. I wasn't, I replied. Not for a very long time. He wanted to be involved, but I set a boundary. I needed Leo to have stability, not a part-time parent who might let him down. When Leo turned 11, I allowed them to start building a relationship, slowly, carefully, on my terms. My mother found her voice then, a fragile, trembling thing. He's wonderful, Clara. Thank you, I said softly. She looked at me, tears now streaming freely down her face. We made a terrible error. I didn't respond because the apology had arrived 15 years too late. My father suddenly snapped, his voice rising not in anger, but in a kind of frantic despair. You could have reached out. You could have come home. We would have been there for you. No, you would not have, I cut in, my voice sharpening for the first time. You told me to leave. You didn't ask if I had a roof over my head. You didn't ask if I was safe. You assumed the most terrible things about me and made it painfully clear I was not welcome in your lives. My voice for just a second threatened to break as the accumulated weight of those years pressed down. You exiled your own daughter when she was at her most vulnerable, and now you want to sit on the furniture she purchased and pretend it was all just a minor disagreement? My mother began to weep openly. I'm so sorry. For all of it. I looked down at her, and for the first time in a decade and a half, I felt a profound emptiness where my hurt used to be. No rage, no sadness, just finality. I nodded slowly. I let go of my anger towards you a long time ago, I told her. But that doesn't mean we can rewrite history. My father looked utterly lost. Clara, this house, it has no space for shame. Dad, I said, my tone softening with a pity I didn't know I possessed. I raised a son who understands respect, who knows that love isn't something you have to earn by being perfect. I became the woman you were so sure I could never be. And now you're here, in the house I earned, breathing the air I paid for, looking at a life I fought for with every fiber of my being. I turned to Leo. Go get your jacket, sweetheart. We're going to the Science Museum. He nodded and quietly headed upstairs, his footsteps barely a whisper on the steps. My mother looked up, desperately wiping her tears with a tissue. Will we see you again? She asked, her voice small and hopeful. I paused, considering her. Then I looked directly into her eyes, making sure my father could hear every syllable. That, I said, is entirely up to you. It depends on whether you genuinely wish to know your grandson, or if you'd prefer to keep pretending the last 15 years never happened. And with that, I walked them to the door. They stood on the porch for a long moment, silent, shattered, their faces as pale as the moon. I didn't offer an embrace. I didn't say farewell. I simply closed the heavy, polished door with a soft, definitive click. And for the first time in 15 years, it was me who stood on the inside of the house with everything they once believed I would never, ever have.